Once again to some bylaws. In this video, we're going to be getting into the details of the proposed amendments to the bylaws of the Advent Christian General Conference. It's essentially the restructuring proposal, the proposal that came from the task force but has been altered in some ways by the Executive Council based on their judgment and looking over that report. So that's important to note. There are differences between the task force report and the final recommendation of the Executive Council. We're going to be digging into the details of those bylaws. I'm going to give you a walkthrough of that. And I'm not going to tell you all the reasons why this proposal should be adopted. I get into that in my video on why we need this proposal and also the 2026 DOP. Get into that in another video. And I also have written an article called Congregationalists as the Congregationalists, comparing this proposal with the structure of the Conservative Congregationalists, the CCCC. And when you look at that, there's really not much of a difference between the two in terms of the function. So we're remaining Congregationalists, and the proposals reflect this. Before we get into the details of the proposal, though, I kind of wanted to give us a big picture of just stepping back and thinking about what is the General Conference. Because I think that there's sometimes some confusion on this point. Sometimes when people think about the Advent Christian General Conference, they think that that every part of the denomination, when we're thinking about regions, conferences, and churches, that they're all actually integrated with the General Conference as such, so that it's a very kind of singular sort of denomination. That's not actually the reality of the relationship here. On the other hand, there's those that think in very independent terms as though all these entities really exist on their own and they have input on the General Conference, but the General Conference doesn't have any say-so in terms of its relationship with these member organizations. When we're thinking about all these different bodies, I would call them Advent Christian entities. And we have those entities include regional associations, conferences, local churches, and parachurch organizations. All of these that claim for themselves that, yes, we're an Advent Christian organization. And of course, this includes the General Conference. Now, each one of these organizations can stand on their own. The General Conference can continue on without one of these organizations. There could be a conference that decides it's going to leave the General Conference. The two would continue to exist because each is their own organization. The General Conference can't force any of these organizations to close. It doesn't have, or to sell its properties or to do those sorts of things. But there is a relationship between them as far as when these entities decide that, yes, we want to be members of the General Conference. Now, with some of our organizations, they pre-existed the General Conference that we have today. So they've been there from the beginning. Even so, though, none of these organizations have a birthright, forever after right to being members of the General Conference. The General Conference has the prerogative, it has the natural right to determine what its standards of membership are. And so we look at this graph and this graphic, and it depicts all these organizations and the lines of relationship running between them and the General Conference. You'll see the associate members, they're really independent lines of association with the General Conference. But when we look at these other organizations, regional associations, conferences, and local churches, we see how they're really nested within each other. So regional associations become members of the General Conference directly. If a conference is going to be a member of the General Conference, it's, as you're going to see in the proposed bylaws, it's necessary that they be welcomed into membership by the General Conference delegate body, but it's also necessary that they're a member of a regional association. And by the same token, local churches, if they're going to be a member of the General Conference, it's necessary that they're members of conferences, and local churches aren't added into the membership of the General Conference directly. They're added by way of being members of local conferences. So zooming in kind of more closely, we can now consider some of the dynamics of the relationship between the General Conference and these member organizations. Again, we see with associate members, it's really just a very clean, direct relationship. Whereas in the case of the regional associations, conferences, and local churches, we see how they really run together so that the churches and the conferences become members by way of also being members of a regional association. Now, what this means is that the General Conference, nonetheless, because we see these lines of connection, does have the right to be able to say, we're going to sever a relationship with one of these organizations. The General Conference could say that it doesn't recognize a conference or it doesn't recognize a church as a member of the General Conference. But the way that things should work, actually, is rather than the General Conference deciding that, and when we're talking about the General Conference deciding that, I must emphasize, we're not talking about staff, we're not talking about the Executive Council, we're talking about the delegate body. So the group of delegates that are representing the member organizations. It's them who make these determinations. But rather than everything running to the General Conference delegate body at every triennial convention, these sorts of decisions about membership can be decided by these other organizations. So the conference can decide if a church is going to continue being a member of the conference, and if it's not a member of the conference, then it's not a member of the General Conference. By the same token, the regional association would determine, is a conference going to continue being a member of our regional association? If the regional association, if the delegate body of the regional association determines that the conference isn't going to be a member of that region any longer, then it's also not going to be a member of the General Conference. And so we can see actually how things are layered in such a way where our structure really recommends things being handled at the level that's most local before things get to the level of the General Conference delegate body. But nonetheless, all these lines of connection, there's lines of connection between these bodies, but they all ultimately run to the General Conference. And so the General Conference has the right to speak into those organizations and say, these are our standards, these are our expectations of you if you're going to be a member of the General Conference. Now I want to take us, with that backdrop in mind, I think it'll be a lot easier now for you to be able to comprehend the specific recommendations that are in these proposed changes to the bylaws. So we look at Article 1, membership, looking at Section 1. You'll see that it's very similar to what we have currently. I've gone ahead and highlighted some things beforehand. And there is this change, though, which says, which are members of Advent Christian conferences or regions, that churches can be members of either. Now, why do we do that? The reason why we do that is in order to open up an avenue for some organizations to decide that they want to consolidate. The task force considered some of these things about the possibility, could you just get rid of conferences and just have regions? But again, we go back to that reality that the General Conference cannot tell any of these organizations to close. They stand on their own. The General Conference can't force them to do anything. And so what we're doing here is giving an opportunity so that if there's some region that would decide that actually we want to do away with the conference level and just have a region, they can do that, and regions could just be, churches rather, could just be members of the region. We go to Section 2, and here we have all the basic standards that are laid out for being a member of the Advent Christian General Conference. Not only do you have to be, if you're a church, do you have to be a member of one of these other organizations, but all of these organizations, if they're going to be members, must affirm and uphold the Advent Christian Statement of Faith, the Declaration of Principles, whether that's the 2026 Declaration of Principles or the current one. If it's the current one, we might have to have some conversation about that because there's some disagreement over that. The enduring resolutions of the General Conference, so thinking about the Statement on Human Sexuality and the enduring resolution on human dignity. All these things our members must agree with if they're going to be members of the General Conference. D lays out the expectation of financial contribution if you're a member of the General Conference. Now, that doesn't mean that in overseeing this as a standard of expectation, that the General Conference is going to be cutthroat about this. Why would we want to lose members needlessly? This is put here in order to prompt conversations. So if there's churches that are doing very well but aren't giving to the General Conference, it raises the question of, are you really invested in being a member of the General Conference? And if you're not, does it really make sense for you to continue being a member? That would be a good conversation to have. No dropping the axe on anybody without having a conversation, but just opening up that conversation with the church that's not giving. Maybe they have some good reasons. Maybe there's something that they're objecting to, and we can talk to them about that. And there's going to be some situations where maybe a church is literally so strapped they can't give anything. Now, there's no amount specified here. Not a dollar amount, not a percentage amount. So a church could give a very, very small amount, give $20 or something like that. And that would just be a token sign that, yeah, they're invested in the denomination even while they can't really offer much because they're going through some tough times. That's why we have our superintendents in place, to be able to be aware of these situations. And as you'll see later on, the superintendents are members of the General Conference Ministerial Committee who will be overseeing these standards and will be keeping an eye on these things just to make sure that all the members are being faithful to the standards that they say that they're agreeing to in being members of the General Conference. E, that's just a basic expectation that if you're going to be a member of the General Conference, you're prepared to cooperate with the provisions that are set forth here. So Section 3 outlines some details as far as how a conference can become a member of the General Conference. This currently isn't detailed now, so it's just a very basic thing to have this sort of detail. It comes with a recommendation from the Executive Council and a 2/3 vote of the delegate body, and removal from membership will follow the same procedure. Now, you would have to ask, if a conference was going to be added to the General Conference, what's the minimum number of churches that would be required? It'd be a little weird to welcome a conference in that only has one church. And when we think about the function of conferences, one of its primary functions is to provide ministerial oversight, to have a ministerial committee. You need, as you'll see later on, you'll need at least 3 ordained ministers to be part of that ministerial committee. And so reasoning through this, we felt that it made the most sense that there would be at least 6 Advent Christian churches in order for a conference to be added to the membership of the General Conference. Now, we know that there's conferences currently right now that fall underneath that number, and the Executive Council looked at the report of the task force, which was actually suggesting some consolidation there, and they said, now's not the time to do that. It wouldn't make sense for us to really push upon these conferences that they must close and try to transition into some different form of organization. And again, the General Conference can't force them to do that. And so rather than doing that, in the current conferences that we have, it's really up to them if they're going to try to consolidate or not. So this just applies to new churches, to new conferences rather, that would be added to the General Conference. And then some just basic common sense rules here about not having some overlap between conferences. With regional associations, the same idea. You need at least 6 Advent Christian churches that in at least one conference, or at least the 6 churches making up being direct members of the region. We talked about how there could be a scenario where you have a region that doesn't have conferences. They still need at least 6 churches because, again, be a little weird to have a whole region and it's less than 6 churches. At that point, it's really worth asking the question, is this a region or is this more of like a mission front? And so that's a basic expectation there, that if you're going to be a Advent Christian region, incoming or currently, it's expected that you're going to have at least 6 Advent Christian churches. Section 5 is very much the same. It was already there as far as welcoming associate members into membership, except it also adds the removal procedure, and the same applies for regions and conferences, that they're brought in by 2/3 vote of the delegate body. They can be removed by 2/3 vote of the delegate body. And we just explained that in the case of associate members that are receiving funding from the General Conference, they're exempt from giving, because it'll be a little weird for them. Like, here's money, now just give it back. That doesn't make any sense. So they're exempt from that expectation. We get down to Article 2, the object of the body. What is the General Conference for? What is it about? The object of this body shall be to serve the Advent Christian people in furthering the fellowship of their faith, in advancing the ordering of their church life, and in encouraging and administering their common endeavors to fulfill the Great Commission in all its intent, as follows. So we see under 1, the fellowship of their faith. And just before I even get into the details, there's a great similarity between what you find here and what's in the current bylaws, though there is some stronger language and some stronger claims. And we tried to make it more succinct, more concise, more focused. So in terms of the fellowship of the faith, thinking about what unites us as a General Conference, we're united by our statement of faith, by our declaration of principles. And so those are established by the General Conference. And they're not merely provided as just, here's a suggestion, but these are actually things that the General Conference establishes as what is uniting us together as Advent Christian organizations. Enduring resolutions, providing a design for united action. All this makes sense in terms of just trying to promote the unity of our regions, conferences, churches, associate member organizations. 2, to serve in advancing the ordering of their church life. We see here establishing minimum criteria for denominational membership. This just goes back to Section 2 under Article 1. B, establishing minimum criteria for the ordination of ministers. We already basically have this in our current bylaws, except the language here is just made stronger. Instead of just providing minimum criteria, we're actually establishing that this is a minimum criteria for the ordination of ministers. And providing credentialing committees of review and appeal for denominational members and ministers. That gets to the General Conference Ministerial Committee, which we'll look at in a little bit. If you're going to have standards, who's going to oversee them? Who's going to make sure that they're actually being upheld? And just managing other concerns that matter to the life of the church. So through the local bodies. It's not that the General Conference should handle everything. Ideally, conferences and regions are meeting much of the need. And that kind of speaks to 3, because there's so much that we might imagine that the staff of ACGC might be doing, and people could think, oh, we could do this, we could do that, but we only have so much staff, and we only have so much money. So we have to think about what are those things that are essential to our mission as a General Conference. So this is what we outline here. To serve in encouraging their common endeavors to fulfill the Great Commission, the General Conference will provide a program of leadership development, missionary outreach, a program of church planting, and also by publishing materials for the benefit of our churches, ministers, and also for the benefit of all these efforts. These are primary to fulfilling the Great Commission. We can't successfully fulfill the Great Commission if we're not raising up new leaders, if we're not sending out new missionaries, if we aren't planting new churches. So that's where we're focusing our efforts in on trying to keep this clean and not having the staff feel distracted by getting pulled in other directions that are really off mission. Moving on to Article 8, the General Conference Ministerial Committee. Now, this section is put in place in replacement of the current Judiciary Committee. So we're not adding an additional thing, we're actually replacing something that's already existing, and we're replacing something that, as far as I've heard, has not actually been functional, because I haven't been able to speak to anyone who's said that the General Conference Judiciary Committee has ever been called upon. And that's not, I don't think that means that, everything's been going perfect in our churches and conferences and regions. It doesn't seem to actually be doing anything. And what we provide here is a committee that hopefully will be able to provide real support and real oversight. Now, the other net effect could be that in the regions, they might also decide to get rid of their judiciary committees because they would become a bit obsolete. And so in the end, you will be removing some positions here, hopefully, on the whole, because that's a concern that the task force highlighted in terms of the number of positions and not enough people. Looking at Section 1, we see the expectations that are set out for Advent Christian conferences in maintaining a ministerial committee. Regions can do the same thing, again, giving that consolidation option. In order for a ministerial committee to remain in good standing, they have to have at least 3 ordained members, and they have to uphold the standards of Article 1, Section 2, Statement of Faith, Declaration of Principles, etc. Now, the reason why we have 3 is because now you could say, why not 5? The more the merrier, certainly, but we felt that at least at a minimum, you would really need 3 ordained ministers to really responsibly examine candidates for ministry, to really make sure that they're sound in their character, that they're sound in their beliefs, and that when you fall under that number, then that really becomes problematic. Now, there is an option here for including lay people, because we know that there's some conferences that do include lay people, and that's allowed as long as the ministerial committee is not made up of more than 25% of the committee is not made up of 25% of by lay people. So if you have 3 ordained ministers, you can have one person that's a lay person, and you can scale out from there. Going on further, it's noted that these committees are authorized to issue and revoke Advent Christian credentials for ministry. Now, of course, the conferences can do that themselves, but what's being indicated here is that the General Conference is recognizing these credentials, and the General Conference is recognizing explicitly the decisions of the delegate body regarding its pastors, regarding the membership of its churches in the conference. And the only case in which those decisions of the ministerial committees are going to be overturned is if a decision is made by the conference or regional delegate bodies, or if some matter ultimately comes to the General Conference delegate body, in which a decision may be overturned in some way. What that looks like will vary from one situation to another. Going on to Section 2, we actually have the details of the General Conference Ministerial Committee that will be overseeing all of this. Now, again, in saying that the GCMC is overseeing these things, that doesn't mean that they actually have any power to revoke credentials or to grant credentials. This is just a committee of oversight and giving recommendation, hopefully to the local level. So if there's something going on in a conference and it requires calling upon the GCMC, they can tell the conference, hey, this is what you should do in this situation. The makeup of the committee is going to include every ordained regional superintendent and one ordained Advent Christian minister from each region. So you're looking at a committee of around 10 people. There's those that are acting as representatives from their regions can serve up to 6 years, 2 3-year terms. After that, they need to go off. So it's not like a Supreme Court lifetime service. We do have a rotation of people working through that committee. The GCMC is empowered to determine the course of action that should be taken. Now, I've already kind of said this, but just to reiterate, they just provide a recommendation. And the way that they maintain their oversight is by receiving reports from each Advent Christian ministerial committee. And so they'll receive that every year. And if there's anything that looks like it's off, they can inquire and say, hey, what's going on in that situation? And then address any issues that might arise there. And when they speak to a conference, say, or to a region, when they speak to a situation and those directions are not heeded, then they're empowered to make a recommendation to the General Conference delegate body. Now, if it's for removal, then that's definitely going to go also through the Executive Council, because in order for a member to be removed from the General Conference, it needs to be recommended by the Executive Council and have a 2/3 vote of the delegate body in order for that removal to actually occur. So when it comes to the actual decision of removing someone, removing a member organization, that's not something that the GCMC decides. They don't just snap their fingers and that happens. It's not something that the Executive Council decides, or they have to say, we think this is what should happen. The Executive Council has to say, this is what we think should happen. And then it has to go before the entire delegate body, and they have to determine altogether with a 2/3 vote that, yes, this is what should happen. In this case, unfortunately, a member would need to be removed. Now, in terms of the makeup of the committee itself, any decisions they make require 2/3 vote. Section 5 just stresses here again that things should really be handled at the local level. There shouldn't be end arounds to just going to the General Conference Ministerial Committee. Before any appeal is made to the GCMC, it should first be heard by the relevant conference or regional ministerial committee. Again, because the GCMC is replacing the Judiciary Committee, it's a body of appeal. But even as a body of appeal, the intent is not to interfere with what's going on at the lower level, unless there's things that are going awry that the conference or the region doesn't seem to be handling. And that approach, again, is just in keeping with the structure that I went over in the beginning. So I hope this video was helpful for you, and if I didn't cover anything that you have questions about, I invite you to drop a question in the comment, or if you'll be going to the convention, I'll see you there, and you'll certainly be welcome to ask me questions there. And we'll be having a panel discussion on this, so you'll be able to ask me, Nathaniel Bickford, Paul Dean, any questions about these things. Hey, thank you for watching this episode of The Advance. I hope you like it. Share it with your friends, and check out the earlier videos that I made on why we need these proposals, the video that I made on the 2026 Declaration of Principles. All this will help you have a really clear understanding of what's going on, what we're considering. Those who are attending the convention, I will see you next week.